Hi, Kate. Hi, Jeff. Lovely to see both of you.
Yes.
These are highlights of my week. These talks that we have together. It's so stimulating, so rewarding to do something that feels meaningful, and connecting with other people, sharing ideas. So
And purposeful.
thank you for being
Purposeful.
here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're at chapter 11, which is a very short chapter. We got so we've got these four headings: purposefulness, and laws of nature, as opposed to purposes. And then we've got this interesting cause effect and its reversal cropping up in the chapter, and then finally, so like what we're all here for, the meaning of life question, or it's like one of the possible answers that Steiner is proposing, so that is really becomes obvious in this chapter. So I think we'll just move. I mean, actually, I'm going to comment on this this statue by Michelangelo, because there is something very purposeful about that brow, isn't there? There is definitely intent there. So it's an amazing piece of work to chisel that out of marble, to create that effect with dead material. Really is absolutely stunning. Anyway, so we've got a little bit of a Michelangelo theme going on through the pictures today. So let's move to the first slide about purposefulness. No, sorry, because there wasn't even a text about it. Let's just have a talk about it. What's going on? What's Steiner trying to do you think, in raising this topic of purposefulness? How does it link into the book? Why might some people think he's being just rehashing old stuff, or perhaps even being pedantic and going unnecessarily into detail? What do you think, Jeff, Kate?
I think he is distinguishing this work as a work that belongs in the history of Western thought, for one thing. And he does this by sort of operationally describing the way in which freedom occurs for individuals through the process of having a purpose or purpose for doing things, and then he really dials that in relationship to the rest of the natural world, and this is an intriguing notion to me, because and that sets us up for the next chapter, where he's also going to be talking about moral imagination and Darwinian evolution. And so in this way, he sets himself up between that which he had brought before, and then the very specific way, the very specific purpose, you could say, even of this book, is given full weight when you make it seems indispensable that he made this short chapter as a sort of hinge between the first part of the book and this last part of the book. It's obviously the last part of the book has already begun, but he's making a very patient transition into making this a matter of human existential fact, something like that. He also accomplishes an answer to Kant that is leaving now Kant in the rearview mirror, right? Whereas the chapter before, the couple chapters before, he's dispensing with the Kantian worldview as a reliable worldview to go forward. But here it's one step away because of this notion of purpose as relates to human nature, the nature of what it is to be a species. And I think it's in the next chapter where he actually suggests that individuals are species in and of themselves in this sense. If you could define species, maybe it'd be worth trying to define species a little bit. But and then for me, this, I left a volley to sort of rambling around with this idea, but that this allows for purpose itself allows for all of the humanness to come to the fore, the deepest desires, the strong feeling for what one does, with an aim in mind, with a sense of meaning. And it also then opens up the notion that the way we relate with the rest of the world, which we're part of, and the way in which we're trying to unite with the world, is going to have to do with purpose, because then we'll be dealing with evolutionary processes that each individual will start to root in and can almost communicate laterally with, like meaning laterally, like with the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom, and and the life spheres of nature. So it places us within the world, in a potentially to also then to see destiny, and destiny is a kind of many lifetimes purpose that is a thread that pulls through karma and reincarnation. So
I think I'm gonna. Sorry, go on.
No,
Did you want to? Yeah.
That's
No, it's good to pick up on the. You or me? Okay, cool. I'm going to pick up on your nature thread and just build on that a little bit, because it was in the last chapter he was talking about bulls don't have horns to butt. He's that he refers to it in that chapter, and refers to it in this chapter. This idea that we purpose is something very specific, but that it's been like put into the natural world where he argues it doesn't belong. And I think this is one of the reasons why we don't have freedom in the natural world. That's like the animal kingdom. It's like it is its ideas, and the plant kingdom, the self, they are subject to like the natural laws. They are a little bit like living machines, in the sense that they are not the source, the creators of their own destiny. They have their instinctual lives, they have their like growing pattern lives, and there will be variation within that. But it's like a picture I've often used before. It's like a lion can't, like lying on the plain there, so like whilst it's chowing down on an antelope, suddenly think, oh, I fancy going to the cinema. It just can't happen to it. And so he wants to remove this idea of purpose from every field of, it's like the world sphere apart from the human kingdom, because he's then using that to link up with this possibility for freedom, or possibility of freedom that we have. And I think it's like you were hinting at with at the beginning of what you're saying, Jeff. It's really important to separate this out, because it's there in natural science, and he talks about it. It's like haunting philosophy as well, and he's really trying to dispatch it and say purpose is nowhere in nature apart from possibly in human beings. And it's also, this for me has really gelled with the book that I read 25 years ago, where after having read it, I said to myself, I'm never going to read Steiner again, which is this idea is how angels work in our astral bodies. And one of the confusing things that Steiner says, if you read outside of the philosophy of freedom, is this idea that time runs in this direction in our experience, and it runs in the other direction in the astral world. And it's sort of like, what? How can that even possibly be? You can't even begin to think about, or I couldn't even begin to think about it. But here, this is what he's doing. I feel as if I'm jumping between all three of those, like the buzzwords here for the chapter. But once we begin to see how what is normally a cause-effect relationship, time-wise, the one follows the other, that when we begin to talk about purpose, the opposite is true, and we've got this reversal of time question coming in here. And I did mention this in the chat on Thursday, but I think for me, it really struck deep. It was somehow a resolution of this thing that's been haunting my mind for perhaps 20 years. What is this? How does he mean that the astral runs in a counter time direction to what we're normally used to? And there is actually no magic going on. If you begin to think about how you purposefully do something, that is what's happening. I think about lying on a beach reading a book with the sun on my back. Okay, a bit difficult for me here in Sweden at the moment, but I can then, so with the end in mind, that becomes the starting point for me then taking steps towards actually achieving it. And so what was this cause-effect relationship in a time sense becomes completely reversed. So that was a really valuable part for me in this chapter to pick up that thread. What about you, Kate? What did you take from this?
I think time is really interesting because it's like if we go back to the partridge in chapter 4.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? You know the effect first, even in phenomena. I mean, you look for the effect, you have the effect, and then you look for the cause. So even like in human reading of time, we're always doing it backwards, but then we order it. So in our head, it's backwards. And then in life, we order it the correct way. And I was talking about this last week or maybe 2 weeks ago. When you have a dream, I mean, you can think about your dreams and try and order it, and you start going, and then this happened, but then actually before I was doing that, but sort of in between I was doing that, and you realize you're not dreaming in a temporal way at all. You just had an
Mm-hmm.
experience of impressions and moods, and then when you woke up, you ordered it in a sort of orderly fashion, but you're not experiencing it that way. So, like Max was saying yesterday, time is actually just a way of reading things, and so yeah, it's not something inbaked into phenomena itself. So it's, if you think about time in that way, it's not actually that confusing to think about time being backwards, because I think Matt did a good way of describing that yesterday, like rephrasing it in a way that isn't controversial. It's interesting for me though, because what was how am I gonna say this? Purpose is, what about more abstract things where you don't have like you can have a mental picture of something. I have mental pictures of things I'm going to do, and then it never really turns out quite like I expected. So it's not, I don't really feel like it's quite that. Do you know what I mean? Like I can have before I go to sleep, I have an idea of I'm going to be sitting here and having this conversation. And I can have a general idea where I'm going to sit and what I'm going to see and what I have to bring. But it's always going to be, it's not like how I intended it necessarily. So what's going on there? That's what I would ask.
Yeah, that's part of the that's part of the mystery, I suppose, because, well, in a sense, everything that's going to happen 10 minutes from now, say, really is already going to happen. The momentum, at the very least, is going to be something that I could either anticipate or not anticipate. And so it seems to me that the fluidity of time breaks apart the idea that time runs in one direction. And it's only we that see it that way. Like I get the feeling that the natural world, without purpose, say, is both the past and the present, and that the past isn't gone; it's still here. That the past is gone for us because we have memory. And this makes me think of Steiner's notion of the potion of oblivion, that one in the spiritual path at a certain point takes the potion of oblivion to forget memory itself, and then the initiate goes across that threshold and wakes up in the cosmic memory, which is a memory of the future and the past at the same time, so to speak. It's mind-blowing, really, because we are so fixed on this linear notion of time, but the idea that you might be able to pop up at a different time, including a different time that is the future, is it challenges our notion of time. And why would we be designed such that we would develop goals of the future, say, through purpose, in order to draw us forward on a particular path? If there wasn't something in the future that was destined to be, but not written like a script. Like when I read this chapter, I often think of the really great film and and stage directors who have an idea of a story, but they have no script, and the actors come together and do improvisation in order to fulfill the idea that's already there. And in a way, that idea is the sort of summation of the whole play before it's even played out. So those are just some musings, I guess, as relates to time.
And I suppose this also links back to the maxims we were talking about in the previous chapter, because if we do start taking purposefulness seriously, as we are anticipating something for the future in our thinking, then what is the inspiration? What is the motive for what that action will be? So how are we going to, if all of us as human beings, we do have this free capacity of purposefulness, of creating a different future from the one that everything else in nature is subject to, but we can change things, we can somehow pull them out of the flow of time. What are we going to choose to do with that with that free ability, with that free capacity. I hadn't actually seen it in that light before as well, how important it is to bring in this, what then becomes the basis of our ethical or our moral life, if purpose is this unique human capacity. Okay, it's a big responsibility, because you could sort of think of it as like this old classical notion of nature is a harmony, and then us human beings, we are creatures coming in, possible of creating further harmonies or disharmonies, depending on what we do with these with this free ability, with this this ability to be purposeful.
Yeah, one can think even self-consciously, but to think with purpose is now that's just a whole nother level, because I mean, think about people who are purposeless, right? They're not purposeless. They've just chosen their purpose to have no meaning, say, in the so they still operationally make choices in the order in which one makes a choice not to do something or to do something. But purpose without meaning, purpose without uh, truth, a sense for what it is that's right for you to be doing for in this life, that's a whole different species of thinking, in a way. Um, so this is I just imagine this. I thought when Matt brought in the existentialist, that I think he thought I was referring to Nietzsche when I said Kryenbuhl. I'm not sure, but 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 Max also brought in. I think Max brought in that article that from Ben Haran that I had shared and Kate read, uh, um, about the existentialists, essentially since Nietzsche, and they're without a divine spiritual impulse, as part of that which inspires or moves one in a direction. uh, there is the idea that then purpose is just ambition, say, or purpose is just the outer trappings of success in order to achieve some exoteric goals, if you will. Goals being sort of the shadow side of purpose, and uh, so with the death of God, Nietzsche's exclamation of "What the hell we just did" with the Kantian worldview. With the death of God, it's the death of values. It's the death of where do you derive values from? Where do you get your ought from? If there's no self to have an ought about, uh, where do you get your moral impulses from? And it's all then everything is like this. An exoteric pinging with other people to figure out what the right way to do things is, and what so Americans have a certain sort of goal-oriented purpose that uh, has to do with the kind of consumerist materialism that is penultimate on the earth in the States, I would say. And then so but the existentialists were like, no, uh, 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 it has to have meaning, but the problem is there's no meaning. So we live in a meaningless expanse of vast nothingness, and we're going to have to come to terms with that. When it's true to a certain extent, at the point at which the empirical uh, worldview meets the moral impulse, and that's when this negative spiritual activity drops into the void and becomes that which is possibly a vessel, and that vessel depends on a purpose, or it's just resentment all the way down.
So is negative spiritual activity sort of like nihilism then? Is that kind of what you mean by it?
I think it can be described in many ways, the way Cryon Buell puts it, because I think it can go in many directions. But yes, I think existentialism itself is a response to the negation of the innate human impulse to add to the world, to do good, when it's confronted by empiricism, which is trying to cram value in an itness relationship with the world, or an objectification of the world, out of there's still the impulse underneath, and then but it gives birth to this activity that is an existential void, which could be maybe concluded as nihilistic, or concluded as atheistic, or these rather unfruitful worldviews. And then Steiner takes this next step, right? He takes he crosses the valley. He's a valley crosser in this case, the valley of the shadow of death. He crosses the valley, comes out the other side with the bounty of that spiritual activity being turned into a continuation of the moral impulse that is existentially available to us all.
There's some reading. It was actually the Ben Hallon book that I was reading prior to us talking, and it was interesting. The negative spiritual activity that you're talking about there. He was talking specifically about St. Paul's experience, like this modern event that happened 2,000 years ago. And one of the ideas he's developing there is that in a way, you're the ancient mind 2,000 years ago. I'm talking about now. So Paul's time, or Saul and Paul's time, they weren't exposed to the same type of forces, corrupting forces that we are now exposed to. And he digs into what that means. And back in that time, a corruption of the ego itself still wasn't possible. But this is what one of the ideas that Ben Hallon's developing, is that it is actually the corruption of evil. This God part of us, this divine spark that is actually becoming corruptible. I mean, in what sense is it becoming corruptible? As we strengthen in our I experiences, and rather than imbuing ourselves, for example, with this universal activity, spiritual activity of thinking, the universal activity of love, moving out into the world, if instead our purposefulness is purely directed towards fulfilling it's like own personal desires, then that becomes a corruption of the ego itself. Instead of the ego recognizing its true infinite eternal origins, instead it just becomes focused in on itself. And I remember listening to a guy, an Italian guy, Bellucci. He was talking about how this idea of even with something as simple as eating, that the body has to eat to survive. There's no question about that. But the eating process can be corrupted if we use it always for fulfilling selfish desires. If we become so involved in the process, if I want to say that this becomes a source of joy and pleasure for us, that there's a potential corrupting influence there is what he was talking about in a video I saw. This is many months ago, and without and we have to. It's very difficult to talk about these things. That there are levels of subtlety going on there, but I know personally for myself, I've this fascination with food is something if you compare to the amount of cooking shows there are on TV, how it seems to have it's grown into an obsession. I think if we go back 20 years in time on TV, for example, there might have been one show a week, or perhaps two shows a week, if that. But it's become something so like huge. So they have all of these different series. I mean, I don't watch them, but I know of them. It's like in the UK, they have like the Great Bake Off, and they have this and they have that. They have all of these competitions, all trying to appeal purely to trying purely to find some greater level of satisfaction through the taste buds, and that's always struck me as something that I can't get into, but quite clearly a lot of people can. Sorry, I would say, yeah. Go on, Kate.
Well, I was also thinking people take photographs of their food as well. It's like the extension of the experience of eating. Yeah, I just think it's gluttony. It's just, it's the need to consume, to numb yourself. I mean, consuming a television show about food is a pretty obvious example of it. And I kind of enjoy those shows as well. I mean, I don't really watch TV anymore, but if I was going to watch TV, it would probably be that, because I would assume it was wholesome. But no, it's not really. It's kind of disgusting.
And this is where it becomes slightly difficult to talk about it, because obviously we do need to eat as human beings. It's not we're not trying to deny ourselves pleasure, but this going all in force, like this is I don't know, this is the maximum expression of like being a human being, being able to like cook a fancy meal. Strikes me as odd, but I've got a son who's a chef, and he would probably disagree with me completely.
Yeah.
I don't get I am too, but I don't completely disagree with you. Although I benefit greatly by the food. I won't say obsession, but the ever since the Food Network on American television hit the ground, there's the term foodie was established, and then places like ours thrive because people are looking for that in every corner, for that thing that would surprise you, and for me, from the inside out, it's a refinement. And I don't mean refinement in the food architecture sense, or food science sense, or the food chemistry sense. I could give a shit about foam on a plate, or a dimensionality to the plate that hides the fact that you only got 3 morsels of food and paid $150 for it. But I am interested in the ways in which anything you do could be made better, and that is a human impulse. And if it's a self-defined valueless culture, then it's going to try to find value wherever it can. But the values are going to become something more like addictions than they are actual refining processes that are driven by a purpose for that. But I really like that idea that the ego starts to become corrupted. It becomes trapped, really.
Completely inward looking. It's all about desire, self-fulfillment, rather than a reconnection with the world.
I mean, it's merely masturbatory.
Yeah.
It's that finished person.
Yes.
You're finished.
Yeah.
You have no potential. It's interesting that you said addictions, because also you've been talking about, finding purpose, and I guess I'm at that age where that is a horrible, terrible thing ahead of me.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
And desperately just wishing that purpose could just be an addiction that lands in my lap that I can't help,
Yeah. Wow, that's kind of beautiful in a way. Some sort of like Mozart, Mozart had no choice, right? No choice. It selected him. Music selected him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I wish
well,
that
fortunately, you're not
going
to fall to that fate, Kate.
No.
Yeah.
And I'm sure in 20 years I'll be so thankful, but right now it just seems like a bother.
Yeah, well, it was existential angst for me at your age.
Yeah.
I'm sure I was watching myself in the mirror tear my soul out because I probably had a pretty narcissistic view of that romantic torture that I was putting myself through.
Yeah.
But it was still misery. It was pretty miserable. Yeah. Which speaks to the importance of it.
Are you trying to encourage Kate here, Jeff?
No, she's fine, man. She's way farther than I was along. I'll tell you that. Yeah, way farther. Just the tools are there, and muscular and profound. So, but I mean, purpose is part of is we can't live without purpose, right? We can't live without developing more and more of a conscious purpose. Otherwise, our process is going to be a devolutionary process. Now, we do live with purpose that isn't ours, and that might be worth discussing because we adopt the purpose of social pressures, for example, and that's part of the achievement addiction or cycle. So operationally, we probably can't get away from purpose, as I'd mentioned before, but purpose with meaning and purpose with value is our heritage, I would say, and it's also our future, which is almost a Hallmark card sounding triteness about purpose. That last line.
I was thinking, I was wondering to what extent this what is the meaning of my life question, or what's the purpose of my life? I wonder if it's something that society has. It's a little bit like the Luciferic temptation. It's sort of something that's sort of been forced on us too early. And one of the reasons I'm asking myself that question is because in biography work, so at the period between 21 and 28, the wandering years with an A, which could also be with an O as well, the wandering years. But there is this key idea in there that we start becoming aware of ourselves as the I incarnates when we're 21-ish, but then actually the next 7 years in this schematic of biography work is about tasting life, actually getting to know yourself a little bit better, so that you can actually then perhaps even begin to think about what your purpose might be. Whereas young people, I think perhaps one of the sicknesses of our society is we're trying to get people to commit, or getting them to think about these questions at such an early age, where they've actually still got so much more to learn about themselves, because they've probably only recently left home. They might not even left home. It's like at 21. It's like with today's with many of today's youth. And it's only once you actually begin to stand on your own 2 feet that you can really honestly begin to no, not honestly, that's the wrong word. You can begin to understand yourself as an individual at a deeper level. Once there's like some of the safety nets have been removed and you become responsible for, it's like all your actions, or a lot more of your actions, in a way that you weren't when you were younger, you also discover something or many things about yourself, but it also including your likes, your dislikes, your strengths, your weaknesses, all of these things, which, if you're going to take the question of what is the purpose of my life, or what might it be, seriously, then these are like really all important aspects of your character that you want to have in place as well, to be able to play with these ideas. And then there's a further thought. So the purpose of a midlife crisis. What is the purpose of a midlife crisis? It's a reawakening to, often it's like in the early years we get waylaid by things that we think are our purposes, and then we sort of begin to reevaluate our lives as we enter into our 40s, as to not necessarily negating the value of what we did earlier, but just recognizing, no, other things are becoming fundamentally more important to me, and I have to choose to dedicate more time and effort to whatever it is that I consider to be perhaps part of my purpose. And of course, this is never a finished process, because as Steiner's also talking about, no, so this is the next chapter he's talking about it, so I've started reading chapter 12. But when we get to moral technique, then it becomes clear that's like, it's only once you start like embodying this, whatever this intuition is, your purpose or your purposefulness, and then it meets the outside world. And like we were saying before, it never turns out as you think. You need to correct things. You need to like rethink things, or perhaps even question the purpose that you originally had in mind. Yeah, so it's an interesting question you pose there, Kate. To what extent should we even expect of ourselves? Or should we be talking about sort of like, it's like having a 20% purpose, and then perhaps like when we're later a 40%, and as you go through life, it becomes clearer and clearer and clearer what that purpose might be. I don't know. What do you think when you hear two old gits like this talking to a young person like you?
I think I hear it a lot, and I think it reminds me that I need to be a bit more patient with myself, because in my head I have, well, my immediate response is, well, the concept of an adolescent and the concept of, young adulthood is very new. And people, why do I have to take so long? But the reason I have to take so long is because the way that, and I mean, take so long, other people, their father was a farmer, so they're going to be a farmer, and that's their purpose, and they find a lot of meaning out of that, and they're not put into this world where you're given so much freedom of choice, but not told that you're actually free, really. And so you just, I don't know, I guess I really resent it a lot of the time. And like, it's a similar thing. Like, I wish I was just given my purpose from the outside. And but
I think it's wonderful when you say it like that.
What did you say?
I interrupted you. No, I think it's wonderful that you express it like that, because you're expressing the reality for a lot of people that we say we want freedom, but there's a large part of us just saying, please tell me what to do. Please tell me what to do. And I'll do it. I'll do it happily. It takes.
Oh, I remember another thing I was going to say. I think this is why Steiner education is so important. Because you really need to develop good, healthy will forces to be able to carry out your choices. I think I self-reflect and think that I don't think my will forces are as strong as they could be. And, that's part of my biography, but at least Waldorf education is an attempt to, shape those will forces so that there's no, so that you just are able to do something instead of overanalyzing why you're doing it, which is ridiculous. It's interesting because I don't know, you're not meant to read until you start having memory in Steiner education. So once you're 7, so that until you are formed, when your new teeth come in, and your new teeth, when you start reflecting and thinking. Until that, you need to be working on the forming of your body and your will forces. And for example, for me, I was reading from a really, really young age, and I took great pride in this because my teachers were annoyed about it. I was reading to my kindergarten classmates. But I've come to realize that the reason they were annoyed, apart from just being dogmatic, was like they did have genuine concern for me because I spent so much time, instead of playing, reading books, I wasn't developing my will forces as well as other children. But I did really, and so instead of will forces, I was developing intellectual forces. And so there is definitely, I think, for myself, a crossing of wires there, where children are forced to be intellectualized from a very early age, and I think that does damage them later in life because it crosses the wires of doing and thinking about it, and you start thinking too much and over intellectualizing in that dry way because you think thinking is words on a page, and not not a sort of what we know thinking is.
It's interesting you mentioned the dogma part, because there's also destiny. So there was something in your destiny, something in the thing that is uniquely Kate, that had an aptitude for reading, and so that part of you came from another time, say.
Yeah.
Where what's tragedy to me is that the children are subjected to this over intellectualization starting in preschool now, or at least around these parts, and so yes, I like that you brought in the will forces too, because it's not just an abstract notion, because kids are learning through kinesthetic relationship with their environment. And then you have the bodily senses that they're developing at each stage. The 3-year-old really comes along and says I when the sense of balance comes to be, when there's an internal ability to meet a vast external world and not be a fall back on your butt, because you just see the baby sort of pull themselves up to look around, and then it's like, whoa, bam, right on the butt, until they've got that right. And then out of the future comes this sense of movement, that they start to master their sense of balance through movement, through just falling forward. And it's so fun to watch a 3.5-year-old, a 4-year-old walk, because they're just basically falling forward. They're just going for it. And then this to protect this process and make sure that they're doing this process and that they've gone through the crawling process. Even, people have these awful devices to to negate the crawling stage, which is a hugely important stage in the process. It's like this is like a microcosm of the picture of how we're forcing children to skip whole stages by over intellectualizing them. So I'll get back to you in a minute, but the notion of the sense of movement, of one's own movement through the world, that translates into exactly what we're talking about. The sense of
Yeah.
movement turns into a sense of path. Like I am going somewhere, and I better have the idea of where that is, or I'm going to keep running headlong into the obstacles that I've not anticipated. Right? I'm not going to figure out the way the world works, and I'm going to keep running into that damn hole over and over and over again. And then I think what you developed, because you had the other aspects of this education and your extraordinary ability to think, is a will force in your intellect, which is that's a lifelong gift. You'll never have to give that up. They just
Yeah.
yeah Kate
Yeah. I'm pleased. I'm pleased
I'm
about
thinking.
how it's working
Sorry.
out.
How do we get from nihilism to here? I can't remember. Just going back in our thinking, we were talking about negative spiritual activity, and it's interesting to trace because there was obviously a path through there. But how do we actually get from the one to talking about biography? It's the. I started talking about the wandering years, and that was off a comment from you, Kate, where the frustration of not having a clear purpose.
Yeah.
That's right. And then we've got the potential corruption of the I, which was the negative spiritual activity, in that perhaps part of the sickness is actually society induced, which goes back to baby strollers that you were talking about there, Jeff, really. How we're inventing structures within society that are out of kilter with a healthy human development, so that it's got its full spread of soul forces for managing its way through life.
You look at that beautiful sculpture that you presented to begin with, and it's clearly a very young person, very young man. But look at that brow. That's somebody who's gone through some sort of at least
it's David, isn't it?
Has gone through some sort of ritual experience that brought the seriousness of life to bear. And without a serious engagement with life, then there's not going to be a purpose. And it's in a way, I would say that any sense of purpose I have was built out of taking life seriously, and not not having my thoughts given to me, and that sets you up as for some persecution, even because you're going to not be following that particularly in the teenage years, and then right after that is the need in an ubiquitous conditioning of kids toward a suspended adolescence, and a coddling of in a way we put tons of pressure on children, but then we also coddle them to the point where they never develop that brow. That's that. I just want things to be innocent for my whole life. It reminds me of the doctor in that Jane Austen novel, who's like, I'm a doctor, but I don't really know what I'm doing, so I don't really have a place here. He could be helping people who are dying on the street, and he's like, yes, but I don't really, I'm as if a child.
It's so, yeah, I know a lot of people like that.
Building on what you're saying there, Jeff, I think what makes us angry, there's this idea of like divine anger, this about the injustices of the world. I think that's one of the ways for anybody to identify what are those important issues for me. Because what makes me angry is not the same thing as makes Kate and you, Jeff, angry. We get angry about different things, but we were angry about some strange things when we were young. I'm sure of it. I know I was. But now when I trace back and think a little bit about it, I can actually see how there is a consistency in there. There was something that was wrong in society, certain things that I reacted to, and they are consistently a part of me. And if I can be involved in actions that somehow counter those things that were making me angry there, then it feels as if it is really coming out of myself. But it's trying to transform it. So if I think about personally for me, so certain injustices, like unfairnesses, I would often get mouthy, and I might get angry as well. And I mean, I surprised myself a few times on that score. But then if I begin to look at it from the perspective, okay, what is my purpose in life? Obviously, there's something deep going on there, and that is I haven't got a musical talent like Mozart, who we were talking about earlier, but I clearly do feel strongly about certain things. And then that can be a way in for me of thinking about, okay, where might my purpose be? What do I really care about? Or it's like in the words of another chapter, uh, where might my love for action be best placed? To work with questions that clearly engage my a divine wrath. It's like a divine anger, and finding some resolution there.
Yeah,
That's
I
interesting.
mean, the whole social justice scourge is really well intentioned. I would suggest really well intentioned purposelessness. It's you want. I remember wanting so bad to have to belong to something that was making a difference somehow, and and but there's no way there's no way around purpose being an individual to individual thing. It's just no way around it. If your purpose is given to you by a by a given framework, by a public opinion, whether the public opinion seems to be radical or whether it seems to be conforming to traditions, it doesn't really matter. And this makes me think, not just for the treachery of what we're doing to people as they move into their young adult life, where purpose played a role in history. Like people talk about their historically speaking, the voices that come echoing out of the past. When people talk about purpose, they're talking about God's purpose. They're talking about fulfilling a purpose that has to do with a God's plan, or in right, and then we move through into the Enlightenment, and we have a shedding of that, but not an answer to it, just the shedding of that God's plan, purpose. And so it seems to be this process of I think of Pherecydes and Pythagoras and their participatory consciousness, and the ways in which they didn't separate the percept and the concept, and the ways in which they were experiencing the creation as an intelligence that was sort of unified with their own. And I doubt that they would have talked about purpose, that individuals would have talked about purpose during that phase of human consciousness, any more than, well, I don't want to infantilize human beings, adult human beings, but ontogeny does recapitulate phylogeny with consciousness, and I wouldn't I wouldn't say that my child has, my 8-year-old has purpose. That he possesses purpose in the world. But what he's doing is developing the skills that will then eventually support the ability to make purpose part of his very specific path in life as an individual who is individuating into that future, say.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Kate. Carry on.
Okay. This ties into what my main question this entire book is like. I can understand the answer, but the question, I don't know what the question is. I think, but what? Because in some way we are evolving consciousness and freedom, concepts of freedom, thinking, purpose, knowledge are different for us than they were for people thousands of years ago or even hundreds of years ago. But we can only know what purpose, truth, knowledge, freedom are for our consciousness. And so I always end up thinking that people then weren't free or that they weren't truly human. But then I go, that can't be right. That's not what I'm supposed to be getting out of this, that I'm born into a particular time where I am the only one that is allowed to have free will. But it's interesting. I guess probably reading Riddles of Philosophy would be helpful for this, because I accept that I can only investigate these concepts in the way that I know them, in the way that my consciousness exists in this time, and the person I've been born into in this time. And then I can imagine what it would be like for people that don't experience freedom in the same way. But I'm trying to give an answer or way to remind myself that just because they don't experience it in the same way doesn't mean they're not truly human. And I was wondering what you guys do for that. How you think about that.
This isn't a direct answer to your question that you just posed there, Kate, but it might end up getting there. Jeff, you've mentioned a couple of times for the last couple of chapters, reincarnation and karma, so like linking it in. And I think also with this question of purpose is also intimately linked into this question here, because if we are to take the idea seriously that we will reincarnate and we're going to have we're going to continue to develop like whatever path it is that's like our own individuality maps out for itself, that this really is, as Steiner describes, this is an inflection point where we are starting, we have lived in the lap of the gods. We've been living at home up until now. The gods have looked after us, and now we're sort of like we're living on our own, so like out in the world and having to start to take responsibility. And it's inevitable for the struggle that everybody's got to go through to move to this. I have to create my own meaning, and that's going to be, I'm going to be carrying that, and it can be refined and changed obviously, but it's not like a be all and end all decision. But we are, when Christ came 2,000 years ago, it changed the trajectory of the development of Earth completely. It was like it's a dying planet essentially, spiritually, and then we have these revitalizing forces, or this revitalizing force that is like going to like completely transform the inner life of all of us, and through human beings the rest of the life of the planet. And in I think it's in the all of those reincarnations. There's like 8 books of them, isn't there? There's like a long lecture series of reincarnation and karma. There are several of those. Yeah, there are several of those lectures where he's talking about how, for example, Achilles, and I believe Empedocles as well, and other sort of like people, these people who had sort of like clear purpose. I think it might have been Achilles, but somebody will have to fact check me on this. But he was talking about how these people had clear purpose. They knew exactly what they're doing, what the right thing was to do when they were living in former incarnations. But when they come into a modern incarnation, they're sort of like, shit, what do I do? And if I'm not completely misremembering it, it's something like Achilles becomes a Hamlet. You know, this doubting, questioning everything. So Achilles like has purpose. I know what I got to do. I just got to go out and kill people, and so like I got to, it's like do the best for Greece. And then that soul in this new age that we're living in becomes something. It's when it falls back on itself, and so like she's, gosh, what am I supposed to do with this self? I think it's interesting to read that series in that context. That what we could say is the problems that the 3 of us are going through, it's nothing compared to Achilles. Or Empedocles. I love the story of Empedocles. He was sort of like, he's sort of like, I've done enough in life, so I'm going to throw myself into the volcano. I'm going to throw myself into Mount Etna. But then he has to come back. What do you do with a life like that? Where, yeah. Sorry, that was a little bit of rambling there, but it's interesting how this sparks off different thought processes. I've got no idea whether any of that was in any way related to the question you were asking.
No, it definitely was. I guess there's no way to particularly answer this question. It's just something that I've had the whole way when I'm reading Philosophy of Freedom, because it's written obviously so particularly for this kind of time and the way that we experience life. And he's putting so much precision in making sure that we can really just accept it as it is, because it reflects the way we see so well, even though we can assume that he sees life probably in a different way with clairvoyant faculties. He still made so much of an effort to be as precise as possible for, this kind of half awake state that we are in. Half awake? I don't know. This thinking, intellectual or consciousness, soul experience. But I just, so it's a difficult thing, because you bring in other things from Steiner. It's the biggest problem with this book, is because you bring in other things to try and back it up, but then you go, but that's probably not the right way to do it. I should be bringing in Philosophy of Freedom to every other lecture to back that up, but it's hard to do that.
Okay, I'm gonna have another go unless Jeff wants to have a go first.
I just wanted to say that as far as this book goes, and let's say it as a backdrop, in my own development, and I think every time I read it, it's like I'm reading it anew, and it has to do with me being in a different place through my developmental process, and I think that sort of links up somewhat to what Angus was saying as relates to the larger arc of karma and destiny and reincarnation. That's all I think I wanted to say, is the developmental process. First of all, that's brand new for humanity. Like, we didn't think about developing ourselves before the advent of psychology. Say, people weren't talking about developing themselves. And in so many ways, it's the ways in which people talk about it now is rather lame. It's a it's kind of self-helpy, and there's no precision to it. There's no like phenomenology of the soul and spirit, and that art that any artist who just was so frivolous with their material would be laughed out of any kind of any any circle of people who are serious about art. And that's what we're doing with our soul and physiology to some degree, is where it's a plastic art that we're molding and playing with. And in some ways, if we don't do it, we're not going to be human at all. So we're dehumanizing ourselves, in a certain way. In many ways, we're less human than ever. So I wouldn't say, when I read this book, I don't think, wow, those people, or when I think about the evolution of consciousness, I don't think, wow, those people were not very human. I think that in some ways they were more human. They're the human that we're striving for to some extent, but consciously and in a unifying way. And there's just no way around it now. We have to do it. We have to do the work. Like otherwise, we'll just get subsumed into something transhuman, which is going to be subhuman. It's not going to be pretty.
Okay.
AI does not have purpose. It does not have a picture of the future in order to draw itself forward, and it never, ever, ever, ever will.
No.
Because it doesn't perceive. It can't perceive reality. No. It can't perceive what you need.
Okay, I've got an answer. I'm not saying you're going to like the answer, but I think I'm going to have another question answer. Chapter 3. This then is indisputable that in thinking we have got hold of one corner of the world process which requires our presence if anything is to happen. Why is that sentence so magical? Because as we've talked about several times in different contexts, thinking created us. And it is the bedrock on which everything, our own existence, our understanding of existence lies. And what it's predominantly in the first 7 chapters, what we're doing is we're familiarizing ourselves with the creator of ourselves. And the stronger the relationship we can build to that activity, that universal activity, so that it becomes a living force within us, which can ever be strengthened. I think that for me is part of it, part of an answer question. Not I need an answer now, but I have access to a resource which I know always, I don't know how, but I know that always it will give me the answer. And this is, he talks about, he fails to understand people who don't have confidence in their own thinking. And in a content, was it in, did we talk about this on Thursday or did we talk about this today, Jeff? So I'm feeling like I've had this conversation recently. It could be with another person, but this lack in confidence that people have in their own thinking is destructive. And this is the antidote. And it's all there just in this book. You don't need anything else from Steiner. You can just take this and relate it to your own experiences of thinking. And once we begin to feel this living force, not theoretically how it created us, but realize it can't be any other way. It has to be this. And that I'm gradually getting to know this process through the exceptional state by thinking about thinking. That's salvation. That's what Christians call salvation. It's not the exact answer of how I'm going to do this, but complete and utter faith, belief out of knowledge that I will find a way forward. It doesn't mean I'm not going to experience pain, loss, but all of the others, like the troublesome parts of life. But I know I'll get through. That's in there, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. It is sort of that, it is kind of like putting your fate in God's hands, is that, isn't it? Because you just know that, and by doing that, you're actually empowered to be purposeful and make choices. You're not actually you're not becoming a slave in that way. Because you have confidence. Yeah. I need to have more confidence in my thinking.
I remember a provocative card I got from my aunt once. And on the card, it was, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And I think it's one of those really potentially very interesting questions. But this, if you couldn't fail, but we are going to fail, but it's actually through our failures that we're actually going to also become stronger, because we're going to want to overcome those failures as well. So it's like that card, it was his birthday, let's say it was 5 years ago or something like that. It's always niggled me a little bit that there's something beautiful about that card, but there's something, I think now I'd say there's something lazy about it as well, because there's also an intent that I just want it to happen. I'll only do it if there's no resistance, if I know I can't fail. But we will fail. But if we've grasped, it's like part of this essence of, I am in contact with the creator of the universe through thinking, and the spirits that the spirit worlds that sort of like want to certain impulses to flow into humanity. If I feel like I'm part of that, how can I not want to try and not care if I fail or succeed? Well, it's not care if I fail, but because I'm doing the right thing, according to me, just according to me, that's a good enough reason for doing it. That actually, whether it's successful or not, that is of secondary importance. I know it sounds sort of very idealistic of what I'm saying, but I think it is a strong part of what I pull out of chapter 3 here, that we really are divine beings.
This is it Dostoevsky who talks about or illustrates the way in which if we're in some sort of state similar to that, say that failure would never occur to us, that we just would never fail, that we would just fuck it up on purpose.
I don't recognize it from Dostoevsky, but
I don't think he said that. He didn't drop the F-bomb, but but you know, that idea that if we're not willing to have a purpose and not achieve it, right, then we're not willing to fail, and then we're just sort of flaccid pleasure addicts or something like that.
Yeah. Well, the sun's rising on my face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where are we? Okay, so let's go for meaning of life. Let's bring a little bit of frivolity to this. Favorite parts of Monty Python, Holy Grail or The Life of Brian? I think there are so many. It's very easy with these topics to get serious, as I think we should. But I remember Steiner commenting particularly on the psyche about its never being able to laugh at life. It's like being it's like the ability to be superficial, which is a particularly, I would argue, particularly an English thing. It's strongly present in our humor. It's something that the Germans, they have the opposite. So like they make everything serious, and Steiner does in different contexts talk about the ability to talk lightheartedly, to see the humorous the humorous side of life. So, random question. I've got a couple of pictures as stimuli. If you think about, I presume you've both seen The Life of Brian or The Holy Grail.
No.
You haven't? Oh, okay. Well, you'll get the answer to the meaning of life in there, or you get different answers. Perhaps if I ask Jeff, and so a part that sticks out for you that it's like you find either hilariously funny or perhaps even related to the topic we're talking about here today, like purpose and we are what was the sentence he uses? The task he sets him for himself. Human life can only have the purpose and the ordering of destiny that man gives it. To the question, what is man's task in life? There can be for monism but one answer: the task he sets himself. So, any links to Kate? You can think about another film that perhaps links to it, or another piece of culture or art that relates to that question that you feel is like linked in. Jeff?
Well, I mean, the Holy Grail is the purpose, right? Isn't that the purpose of all purposes for human beings is to find the Holy Grail? I don't remember enough of that film to speak specifically to say purpose, other than the generalized search for the Holy Grail and the way in which it's made a hilarious quest. Except for this scene with the Black Knight here, that when they exchange swordsmanship, and the Black Knight gets one limb cut off at a time, and the poor good knight is just that's searching for the Holy Grail is just trying to move along on his purpose, and he has to keep hacking off parts of the body of the Black Knight, and the Black Knight keeps egging him on and calling him a chicken, and
you're a lily leaf, was it chicken or something like that?
Yeah. So
lily livered.
But I don't have anything specific. What do you have as relates to these?
I don't. Purpose? This is actually. There are so many scenes that are hilarious, but this is actually. I'll read out the text here. This one on the right, you've got the scene where Brian, son of God, obviously, reluctant Messiah, he's running away from the crowds because they think he's the Messiah. He's not the Messiah, and he's running through the desert, and they're all chasing after him. And then he's like accidentally jumps into a pit, and there's a hermit there who's been there for, I don't know, is it 20, 30, 40 years with his sort of oath of silence. And he jumps on his toe, and the man talks. And the people are chasing him and saying, it's a miracle, it's a miracle. And so you've then got this conversation that's going on here. Hail the Messiah, because he got this guy to talk. I am not the Messiah. Will you please listen? I say you are, Lord, and I should know. I followed a few. I'm not the Messiah. Do you understand? Honestly, only the true Messiah denies his divinity. What? Well, what sort of chance does that give me? all right, I am the Messiah. And then they all bow down. He is the Messiah. He is the Messiah. Yeah, I think this guy's a reluctant Messiah.
Aren't we all?
The world is trying to tell him he's the Messiah, but he doesn't want to be it.
Aren't we all? Yeah.
Yeah.
Just imagine, actually, to bring it back to seriousness, you know
Okay,
that
I'll change the picture.
your destiny is to be the Messiah, say, right? You know that your purpose is a sacrifice for, speaking of time, your sacrifice is for the future. That what you have to live through is inevitable. In fact, it's a key for the way in which freedom will be achievable, because of the way in which the way in which the initiatory process led to a kind of freedom that even permeates the physical body and is able to replace the life processes to such a degree that the freedom goes right into the marrow of the bones and is able to remain conscious in the underworld and then re embody, so to speak. That's a hell of a purpose. It's where destiny and purpose meet somehow there, isn't it? And Steiner talks about the Christ now as the Lord of karma, which is the Lord of the individual process of incarnating in order to develop the ability to have purpose in a way, or freedom, and purpose is the agency out of which that occurs. Or agency, is that the right word? It's certainly yeah. I have this open question coming out of this chapter, which is, what is the relationship between destiny and purpose? And in some ways, people were describing the difficulty there as relates to time, and if we have a destiny, then how is that not fixed? Where's the improvisation? Where's the spontaneity? If we already have a destination, so to speak, or a destiny, and that has something to do with the way in which purpose fits into destiny as something that needs to be fulfilled rather than something that is written. Yet it's still an idea that's very specific to you. Yeah.
The improvisational script where you have the idea and you act within it. There you have it, right? There is only really room for improvisation because you have the general idea of where you're going, and you can't actually control of how that's actually going to work. That's why improvisation is so important as a creative process, because it's sort of an experiment in what you're actually doing in your entire life. Yeah.
You're also touching on a theme, an aspect of purpose and destiny, which has long been important for me. It's the quality of the relations that you build in life. There's this idea, so love is the only thing that lives on. And one of the ways that we express that is in our relationships. So I think very much of relationships, the quality of our relationships with one another, the quality of the new relationships that we can create whilst we're here. These are all, it's like weaving these karmic threads. We've got no idea where they're going to lead to in the future, but if there was trust and love at the basis of those relationships, when we have control over them, it's like in this life, then it can is invariably going to lead to something, a strength on which you can build, like in the future, whenever that is, if your lives happen to like coincide in the future. There's something specific that Jeff was saying that made me think about that. It is relationships are, and the quality of relationships are so important in this process of purpose making.
Before we leave, I think we should talk about this very brief addendum.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that?
I can put. Do you want me to put it up on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. I don't have it as a slide, but I can put it up on the screen.
Mm-hmm. Because he makes reference to a say a higher purpose or a different kind of purpose that would be. It's not a reference that it's not the whatever he's referring to. There's nowhere else in this book that he does the same thing.
Okay, this is it here. I'll just bring it up. I think you can. There we go. Is this you're talking about? This we're in chapter 11.
If here the concept of purpose is rejected even for the spiritual world lying outside human action, it is because something is revealed in that world which is higher than the kind of purpose realized in the human kingdom. What in the hell are we talking about?
It sounded like you want to say something, Kate, or was I missing something?
No.
I think it tickled her somehow. and when we say that the thought of a purposeful destiny for the human race modeled on human purposefulness is erroneous, we mean that the individual gives himself purposes and the outcome of the working of mankind as a whole is compounded of these. This outcome is then something higher than its component parts, the purposes of men and women, of course.
He gives this wonderful picture, doesn't he? It's like in somewhere outside, obviously, the philosophy of freedom, where it's like we're just like a cow chews up the grass to feed itself. It's like the gods, they chew up human beings to fulfill their needs, and outside is very difficult to understand what he means out if we don't take in ideas from anthroposophy here. Although he does actually talk about Christ versus God versus something earlier on in this chapter, doesn't he? Right. I think we'll have to come back to that. But I'll say what I was going to say anyway, because I feel it is a little bit about opens the door a little bit. I mean, a key thought in anthroposophy is the purpose of the earth is to develop the mission of love. Okay, how's it going to do that with human beings? So the gods do have a purpose with the evolution. So they've got a greater goal, just like we can have a greater goal with something that we're planning on doing it. They're not. They're far from inactive in this process, and I think people like us feel inclined to align with those gods' purposes as opposed to the other gods' purposes who would prefer to have like an eighth sphere or an Ahrimanized version of the earth, something where the evolution of the earth is truncated and the mission of love never becomes realized. But yeah, it's problematic bringing that into this text, but
it's helpful, I would say. The idea comes to me that of what does he say? I don't even know where it is. That we are the religion of the gods.
Yeah.
And this is a very mysterious and beautiful paragraph to me. If here the concept of purpose is rejected even for the spiritual world, lying outside human action, it is because something is revealed in that world which is higher than the kind of purpose realized in the human kingdom. And then here's a contradictory statement in a way, or a contrapose, say. And when we say that the thought of a purposeful destiny for the human race, modeled on human purposefulness, is erroneous, we mean that the individual gives himself purposes and that the outcome of the working of mankind as a whole is compounded of these. This outcome is then the higher. This outcome then, this outcome is then something higher than its component parts, the purposes of men. So does that mean that the outcome of the compounded individual purposes is the higher purpose realized in, say, that is the something that is revealed in that world, which is higher than the kind of purpose, right? That's right. That's what we were saying there at the end, wasn't it? Like the human race isn't going to get out of this until everyone is on board, at least that remains human. Meaning meaning that freedom is achieved, say, or love achieved through freedom. Yeah.
You said the two wonderful words there. When I find my head exploding with Stein and thinking, I don't understand what's going on, I've learned to tell myself, Angus, it probably has something to do with either freedom or love. There's something you're not getting here. And this is one of those examples where you've got an apparent contradiction. But then when you begin to think about it, specifically with this one from the freedom angle, I find a resolution, because if the purpose of the gods is to give us freedom, and love without freedom is an oxymoron anyway, but if their purpose is to give us freedom, but you can't give somebody freedom, they have to choose to take it themselves. It's this real irony. The gods have set up a world in which we can develop freedom to love, but that doesn't for it to be truly free, it cannot be imposed on us. Conditions can only be set in which, like, human beings might choose that path. And I see that as, what is this purposeful destiny? That we become free, spiritual, loving human beings.
Does it tie into what Alex was saying in the reading group about a plant unfolds its idea, but it cannot do that unless it has the soil and the water and the air? And we can't complete the idea of what a human being is alone. We need to do it together.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, and that's
with the help of the spirits.
That's almost a heretical statement, because what you're saying is then the spiritual world can't do it without us doing it together. The spiritual world, it's our responsibility in that sense to fulfill that which the spiritual world sees through us, so to speak, perceives through us, thinks through us. Yeah, we're each other's soil. We're each other's light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that's,
like you said, the spiritual world, Angus.
it's collective. It's the rise of collective intelligence, right? And in the shadow of that, of course, is the collective ignorance that people are adopting in borrowed concepts and the sways of public opinion and that sort of thing. But it's the impulse is for us to have a mutually unified um, a mutually unified intimacy with each other. There's just no way around it.
Yeah. And it is that intimacy that you're talking about, Jeff. It's something we've reflected on a couple of times. This closeness that we feel to each other, despite hardly knowing each other. It's almost like it's a little bit like a spiritual passport. If I meet somebody who really wants to engage seriously with this type of material, then somehow I feel as if we're working from the same spiritual soil. We're working from a community of ideas, which really has the ability to generate new ideas, to generate closeness. A community is the word that I keep hearing. We are building communities through this.
This is I will say, why some of the most impressive people that I've known are engaged in anthroposophical work. And these people are so freaking capacitous that they could be they could capitalize on it to a massive degree for their own personal trappings and success. But they're so committed to the purpose of developing this collective mutual intelligence that their devotion to this communal activity is they never go astray with an ego. I think of the work and life of Arthur Zients. If you don't know him, he's an amazing man. He has Parkinson's now.
Is that the physicist?
Yes, from Amherst, and he was the North American Anthroposophical Society leader for a while, and he convened, spent tons of energy convening conferences with the Dalai Lama and people from different disciplines in the sciences to compare sort of research notes with 2,500 years of research into basically the internal the fruits of the internal and contemplative life. All right, and then sort of try to bring those two things together. Just lived a life of purpose in that sense, and he could have written books. His command of speaking, he could have in this age he could be a public intellectual that has millions of views, but he would have had to give up something of an ever defining meaningful life that he was living. And this is I guess an opportunity to pay tribute to him, but yeah, that devotion is well, it adds a richness to the devotional life, doesn't it? It's not a passive reverence. It's a loving reverence.
Yeah.
Should we wrap it up there?
Yeah.
Lovely conversation today.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.